Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are beginning the series on the Bible, the psychological meaning of the biblical stories by Jordan Peterson. Okay. And what we're going to do is we are going to use a format which is very different. Now, Bible stories and Bible is familiar to most people. And even if you're not watched the videos, you have the context for it. So what we're going to do is that Victor, Roger, and Claire. Today Claire is not here, but these three of them will make very short presentations. All of it put together about 30 minutes to highlight some of the key concepts from each of the lecture. And once they do that, I'm going to come up with questions based on those concepts. Typically, it'll be like 4 or 5 concepts. And we're going to convert those into key questions. And I'm going to set up breakout rooms by questions. And you get to choose your breakout rooms. So you can go and choose to discuss any of these questions. And we'll be doing multiple rounds. We'll do at least, I'm thinking today, 4 rounds. So there'll be about 5 or 6 questions. You will get 4 chances. So you go discuss that question for about 10 minutes. We'll come back again together. Then you again make a choice of which room you want to go into to discuss which question. And after all of that, we'll come back together to talk about our takeaways, both from this format and the series and what we are looking forward to. Okay. So this is a new series and a new format. The format is designed to accentuate what many people say is the primary value of these meetups. And that is to have a very deep discussion on a given topic from multiple perspectives. So, here people are from everywhere. They're all ages. They come from very different backgrounds, different levels of knowledge, and they bring their context to bear on the topic. And people respectfully listen and speak. They speak authentically and they listen respectfully and respond. And something magical happens when you have that going on with so many people. So that is what the format is designed to do. And let me know at the end how the format worked. All right. So with that introduction about the format, let me hand it over to Victor and Roger. Victor.
Well, thank you, guys. Tonight, we are discussing psychological significance of Bible. This series done by Peterson. And he opened the first lecture by discussing why we want to look into this old book, this strange book that is of different stories, and it has contradictory document that is clobbered together over hundreds of years, and it outlasted kingdoms and empires. And it is written in multiple languages like Aramaic, Greek, and Hebrew. And it has been written at different places and different times, the stories, and they are put together. And how to approach it? A good way to approach it is, let's take it as a mystery. Let's take it as a beginner's mind. And let's assume that we don't know anything and we don't understand the intention behind it. We don't understand what kind of impact it had on the civilizations around that time, and how people believed in this particular book around that time. Even now, when people believe it, we don't know how they come to believe it. We don't know all of these, and let's go explore in our own beginner's mindset. And Peterson said he admires Nietzsche, and he learned a lot from Jung. And talking about Nietzsche, he mentioned Nietzsche actually criticized Christianity, especially dogmatic Christianity that existed around his time. And at the same time, he also mentioned a couple of things that give credit to Christianity, saying that he uh, he also he is of the opinion that he, meaning Nietzsche, it's not possible to be free unless you have been a slave once. By that, what he means is, as we cannot go from childhood to fully fledged adult human being, that's not a straight path. That's not how we go. We take a child and we go through, the child has to go through a particular discipline, and only then that particular, whatever the thing that the child is disciplined in, only then that he or she can become an adult and produce something better. So that's how we go from childhood to a fully fledged adult. And he says that Christianity, which actually trained European mind for around 1,000 years on a particular single system of thinking, that made the mind to concentrate on a particular thing, and that led to a disciplined thinking, and which led to a scientific revolution. And at the same time, he is of the opinion that Christianity died at its own hands, because in the process of training the mind and looking at a thing with the truth, so that led to the question, that led to question the roots of the dogmatic nature of institutionalized Christianity, and that's how it died. It's in at its own hands. And towards the end, he also proposed that God is dead and we have to create our own values. And for this particular point, Nietzsche understood one major thing. It's a bit complicated to break it down, but we as humans, we have our own set of experiences. We have our structure of experience. Outside of it, we don't know a lot. We don't know a lot. But between these two, there is a buffer kind of knowledge that exists within us, that gives shape to the articulated knowledge. And this manifests in the form of behavior first, as even in an individual and even at the social setting, at a civilization setting. And this kind of behavior, it holds a lot of knowledge, and only looking at this behavioral knowledge and studying it, only then we can derive the articulated knowledge. And these two behaviors have to be in sync. When these are in sync, we as a spirit, we are in sync. But when this goes away, when the behavioral knowledge is out of sync with the articulated knowledge, that creates a sickness, and that's when we go into ideologies, try to latch onto something else. That's the reason he says, for us to have that knowledge, we'll have to since we know that we passed the idea of God, now that we cannot go back, we have to create our own values. So that's the postulation from Nietzsche. Let's talk about Carl Jung a little bit. Peterson says he learned a lot from Carl Jung and Jean Piaget. Carl Jung is a student of Nietzsche and Freud. Carl Jung actually studied under Freud for 5 or 6 years. And Freud, we have to credit him for popularizing the idea of unconscious. Before him, there was no such widespread knowledge about the notion of unconscious within a person. And Carl Jung studied dreams. He also believed the similar thing. Our articulated knowledge is embedded in a dream-like behavioral knowledge. And Freud, well, I'm talking about Freud now, switching between Freud and Jung. So Freud, he postulated that our thoughts, our actions, and our perceptions are shaped by the unconscious motivations. His postulation was we have id, ego, and superego, and we are not we are not in control of ourselves all the time. So that's a very unsettling theory that is postulated in psychoanalytic theories, but that tends to be true. And the articulated knowledge, the conscious knowledge that we have, that is very little, but most of the knowledge is in the form of behavior. We can take an example. Whenever if we have a couple of bad weeks, and if we go talk to someone that we like, and maybe that the discussion goes in a wrong direction, and when we probably might snap and say something that we won't be proud of. When we look back, we see the behavior, and it it could be that the behavior actually comes from the body, and that kind of emotions comes from the body. Those kind of thoughts come from the body, not from a, a conscious mind. So we see that in ourselves most of the times, and even in others. Can we create our own values, as Nietzsche was postulating? For that, psychoanalytic theories say that we look like we are one single person in a particular body, but we are a set of sub personalities clubbed together, and we exist as in a single framework, but we move between so many emotions all the time, and we are not that transparent to our own behavior in real time all the time, which leads to the idea of we are a loose collection of subpersonalities, and that in a way says that we are always not in control of ourselves, so we cannot create our own values. Now, where does it lead? So Carl Jung studied dreams and myths a lot. He went to East to study the cultures in the East, and the symbologies of the Eastern cultures. And he believed that our articulated knowledge is embedded in a behavioral knowledge. And dreams are the birthplace of this behavioral knowledge. And we have to study our own behaviors and dreams in a personal setting and in a social setting to derive that articulated knowledge. And some of those dreamlike knowledge is found in the behavioral patterns of some of the stories in the Bible. So that's probably one of the good reasons to look into these stories.
Wonderful.
So,
Thank you. Thanks, Victor. Next up, I think that was a great way of starting. I think Nietzsche, uh, God is dead, is a good kind of starting point, good challenge to the mind. So I think that's a fantastic place to start. And the distinction between kind of conscious and unconscious articulated and the dream is just perfect. Thank you. Next up is Roger. Roger, go ahead.
Thank you. And can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So, kind of continuing off of what Victor was talking about, I'm going to also start off with a similar point as to why are we bothering to talk about a book that has been around for so long, but also that more and more often in our own culture and all around the world, the belief in those myths are starting to really decline. Uh, there's a couple of reasons why it's still very much worth our time and worth considering. One of the biggest reasons is that to understand the Bible is to take a look at a document that has shaped large parts of human culture politics, morals, religions, laws, norms, and perspectives. So yes, it's relevant to everyone. Yes, even you too. If someone states that it's not, and that they don't need, they don't need to believe in these little fairy tale myths, that in fact, that's just what people tell themselves because they're afraid of dying or anything of that nature, you need only ask them what it is that they believe, right? And eventually, all the information that they have is going to come from somewhere else. You keep going deeper and deeper, and eventually you're going to find that it's going to come down to their upbringing or their ancestors' upbringing. But almost all our information of what's important, what's valuable in life, what's important, what we should be doing with our life and with this existence at all, comes partially just passed down, and from our culture, from the things around us. So which the next question is, well, what's shaped that culture? What shaped our laws? What shaped our norms? And you'll find that the Bible is just one example of an artifact of human beings that has permeated through almost every aspect of humans. So it's a worth, just even from a historical standpoint, if you don't want to take any of the myths seriously, even just trying to understand, well, what was it that even if that this book, what effect did it have on us just as a whole, on how we even understand reality? But it actually offers more than just that, because you can also see the Bible as an attempt for humans to understand their condition. It's a collective attempt of humanity to come to terms with its existential conditions and to find out what's to be done about those conditions. What does it mean for us to be able to seemingly have free will, or at least the appearance of free will? What are we supposed to do about that? What are we supposed to do about the fact that we're going to die, and we all know we're going to die, right? What is a being of our nature supposed to do about that knowledge? And most importantly, it's one attempt, this isn't by no means the only one, but one attempt of a large collection of humans across history attempting to answer an eternal question that all humanity and even life has. What should I do? What should be done? I exist. What now? Right? What is it what's the thing that follows from this? And even if you don't want to see it at all from a religious perspective, even from a secular perspective, or even an existential perspective, you can still see these stories as a reflection of humanity attempting to solve those problems. And those problems don't go away just because you don't believe in God, right? So those are some of the main reasons why it really is worth our time to consider. Even if our ancestors were completely wrong and they failed and got all the story wrong, what was it that they even saw? What was it that they even understood? How was it that people were willing to die and kill for these beliefs? And what would that mean to us, right? And that's kind of what Victor was getting at about, what does it mean if we believe that? What does it mean that we don't anymore? So to dismiss it, if that's a complete fabrication, it's still a complete fabrication on which your ideas of value are predicated on. So it can't be quite so easily just shrugged off. And I think that's the first point that we really do want to hit in when we're going to jump into this, is that this affects everyone. Simply because you're not in agreement with it doesn't mean it hasn't shaped you. It's just you may not be aware of how it shaped you. And if anything, understanding the Bible helps you understand how the Bible has possibly been shaped, how you've been shaped by these outlooks. So, and just to give you a quick general perspective on what my approach is, I'm attempting to get into some of the main points that Peterson will later be standing on as he develops this theory about how to approach the Bible, what it means, and his case for one theory of what we could conceptualize something as God, without having to necessarily jump into the more mythical side of things. And the first one, which anyone who's been to the Maps of Meaning lectures will likely remember, is the dynamic between empiricism and phenomenology. So these are two perspectives that, from a Jungian perspective, originally used to kind of be our singular perspective, but have been split as after the Enlightenment, we kind of started to analyze the world and attempt to quantify and separate. And we wanted to get rid of all subjectivity, which in some ways illuminated a lot of things about the world. In other ways, it's really limited. So the modern perspective, which is the perspective most of us tend to normally have, but it's also because that was how we were brought up, is that reality is reality and we just live in it. So jumping from our previous point to the next one, it's worth considering that in this perspective, reality is nothing but dead things. And somehow, eventually, if enough dead things happen, eventually we sprung out, right? That's the general perspective. It's the perspective that the scientific view tends to normally take. And it's extremely valuable. It's given us, it's the very thing that allows us to even have this current communication, right? All that perspective has allowed us to investigate all the matter around us and create these things that are extremely valuable, such as computers and anything and everything that's given us science. It's given us a lot of information. However, there are some problems that are still extremely big that it can't give us any information on. And those problems tend to be problems that have much more to do with humans. And that's the whole humanities aspect, right? What is it that we should do? No matter how much we study everything else around us, that's not going to tell us what it is we should do. What is right or wrong? Like, no matter how much you understand about the world around you, none of that is going to define what exactly is right or wrong, what should be, or what we have an imperative to do. And this is where the second perspective comes in. And for Carl Jung, and I would say for Peterson too, it's the perspective that the psyche is as real, that psychic reality as real reality, because you can see the world as us being nested within it, where reality exists and we just happen to be one object. But it can also be completely inversed. It could also be the case, and you can, with a little bit of effort, conceptualize this, that reality is only ever defined by the observer, not consciously, right? It's not like we can change reality with our mind, but that rather the only thing that we know about reality is the things that we experience. And therefore, the only reason that reality can even be said to exist is because it is experienced. So in a way, the world is also dependent on the observer as much as the observer is dependent on the world. And this is going to come, it's going to be really important to understand this when he talks about the beginning of time. So Adam and Eve and all that, which we've covered a little bit, but he's going to jump in more into detail on this, is that consciousness seems to give the world itself form. Without it, there's no real reality. If you consider your senses and what they aren't actually reality itself, but rather your brain interpreting that reality. The best example of this is that I always find is in the Zen riddle of, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? And you can say yes, but without an observer, no sound was actually created. And you can make the claim that vibrations maybe were, but that's not what we experience, and that's not what we know as sound. And even if vibrations were, the only way you would detect them is through sensation. So in a way, you can another way to imagine it is, if there was no observer, there would be no color, because color is an interpretation of light wave, not the light wave itself. So the case that I'm making here isn't that one is better than the other or that one should be ignored. It's the case that in developing our scientific method, we may have accidentally cut out something else that also had value, that could also give us some information. And that is our interpsychic, that's us and our actual emotions, that they're not just random subjective things that should be thrown away, but rather one of the primary sources of information that we even have as beings. So that would be the second point that I think is important to understand from the get-go, because Peterson kind of just takes off after this with the assumption that everyone already understands these. The third point is how facts and abstractions interact and the validity of abstractions. So I start to point this one out simply by a quick question of, how true are numbers, right? How can we do you believe that numbers hold the quality of being true? And then consider how weird numbers actually are. They don't seem to actually occur in time or space. There's things that are examples of a number, right? That can be quantified as certain numbers. But the number itself doesn't actually exist in time and space. It exists as an abstraction in our mind. And yet we seem to believe that they're real. And in some ways, they're more real than any single thing that's counted for. It's essentially a relation between different objects that isn't within necessarily the object itself, which you can then make the next question of, could that be the case for other things? Could that be the case, for example, that other abstractions of objects could also be true in a similar sense? Or maybe not even to that much of an absolute sense, but even you only need to allow it to get close. And the reason that I'm making this point is because for Peterson, this is exactly what the Bible is functioning as. It's functioning, at least in part, and most stories are actually functioning in part as this, an abstraction of human behavior that holds true. And essentially, that's a reflection of the archetype for anyone who's a fan of Jung. It's a reflection of the behavior that, that you can see within the psyche, not because you're looking directly inside the unconscious, but because everything that seems to be coming out seems to hold a similar pattern that you can abstract the pattern from, that you can abstract and see that they're all quite similar. So for example, the Great Father is a constant pattern that we see in a lot of different myths and a lot of different conceptions, but there's this constant pattern in all of them. And the next question to that would simply be, could it be said that these abstractions are real? And if that's true, and the Bible is filled with stories that are nothing but abstractions, could it be said that the Bible, at least in part, is true? And that's kind of the line of thinking that Peterson's going to kind of go down, just to get everyone's mindset for the coming lectures. But these are just some of the main points. I only got 2 more left, but for this one, I think Victor did a really good job of already covering a lot of it. I'm just going to go kind of quick here. For Peterson's perspective, in his Maps of Meaning, he covers this a lot more. But for him, he perceives the human being as a bottom-up development. In other words, action always comes first. It's actually your actions that create your psyche, which then means that you act before you understand at all what you're doing. It is nothing but action. And it's only through observation and maybe some post hoc rationalization that you actually start to understand what you're doing. But the action always comes first. And this is interesting because it also means that your actions and the things you do have much, much more information than you understand. And that actually fits perfectly with the psychoanalytic perspective of hidden motives. Because from the psychoanalytic perspective, which constantly says, you don't know what you're actually doing. You tell yourself a little story about why you did something or what you want or what you're doing. But in reality, you don't actually know what you're up to. And sometimes what you're up to isn't at all what you think you're trying to do. And you'll find that out later only by spending a lot of time in self-reflection and realizing that this whole time you were lying to yourself. And the reason for that is that your own actions aren't necessarily completely your own. You don't fully understand them. You aren't fully conscious of what you're doing. And once you understand that, then you start to understand what Peterson means by this diagram, is that outside the purest form of knowledge that we kind of more in some ways know because we're acting it out, but don't actually understand at all, is the acted knowledge, right? And then the next question that Peterson says, like, so that's weird. And also the next question that you should ask yourself is, well, when we do know things, where do those things come from? And it's, as he points out, it's like they just kind of seem to pop up, right? Articulated in a language that you understand, right? Either as a voice or as an image of some sort that's meaningful immediately, but almost always articulated already. It's already clear. The knowledge is already spoken. What Peterson makes the case is like, well, there's a transition there between those two. And that's that he uses the Jungian framework of a dream. Because for Jung believed that dreams essentially functioned as that. They were attempting to understand symbols and images and also use symbols and images to communicate what they were trying to understand. And that was when you're dreaming, that was what was actually playing out, is the dream was trying its hardest to articulate something without quite knowing how to. And that's what your unconscious is constantly trying to like churn away. This one isn't going to be so important until later on, once we start getting into the full abstraction. But keeping all of those theories, I'm going to now try to basically speed run the general theory of God that he's going to work with. This is very much bare bones. He's going to be filling this out a lot, but just wanted to give everyone a general outlook so they understand what to look for. So we'll start with the lobsters and hierarchies, and his main point, which anyone who's read his book is probably already very familiar with, the fact that hierarchies have existed so long that even lobsters had them, and lobsters have been around since before there were even trees, meaning that the structure of the hierarchy and the fact that the hierarchy is a part of our internal system, in the sense of we seem to have hierarchies and so do lobsters, which means that structure seemed to have maintained itself through evolution, at least somewhat. It's of a social organizing structure. It's extremely old. And most importantly, since it's so old, it could be considered a part of our evolutionary environment, which means that we actually evolved to it, which would explain a lot, because it would explain how we perceive things. It would explain how we seem to organize ourselves, how we interact together, how we seem to constantly elevate people that do certain things. For example, all you have to look at is anyone who's a celebrity. Why are they a celebrity? Right? More than likely in our modern culture, there might be some questions about that, but more than likely, normally someone attains a celebrity because they're good at something. They're admirable in some sense. And here's where Peterson kind of takes off with this idea. So, considering everything else we've said, if we're essentially a psyche that's evolved to climb up the hierarchy, that would then imply that the thing that the things that we admire are people that are already higher than us, which seems to be true, at least, reasonably. It's a reasonable claim that the people that we admire tend to be people we see as better than us. And Peterson makes the case that, well, that admiration that you're feeling is just the instinct to imitate, which makes sense. When you see someone that you're impressed by, you're like, I kind of want to be you. I want to do what you're doing. And you might even catch yourself doing things that other people are doing that you admire. So then the next question becomes, why wouldn't you just abstract the thing that is admirable? Right? And as we've talked about abstractions, well, what could that abstraction be said to be true? If I want to be a great fighter, let's say I want to be the best MMA fighter, well, I'm going to take the best fighter of all the different styles, look at all their personalities, how they all act, and try to be like, even within our psyche, we tend to say, it's like if they all had a baby, right? Which physically is impossible, but you'll understand exactly what I mean by that. If we combined all of them, what would be the thing that would come out that they all have in common? Because that's the thing I would want to be. That's our heroes, right? That's who you as an individual wants to be. The next step from that is, okay, so we got our heroes, right? In different hierarchies, different skill sets. The next question is, well, okay, hold on. We got some people that are really amazing, and we got some strategies on how to become that's really amazing. And we tell stories about the people that get even close to that, because that's our myths of heroes and all that. We've never talked about a hero that's super boring and lame and never does anything, right? And there's never any redemption or any arc, because that's just a boring story. We're not interested in those people because they do exist. We just don't care. But the next step is then, okay, well, who should be in charge of us, of all of us? Not just be good at one thing, but in charge of everything. Well, then you take your heroes and you do the same thing again. You abstract from the heroes an ideal ruler, an ideal sense of authority. That then becomes a king, a leader, the chief, right? At that point, what authority here means is essentially willful submission. So it's not someone that's stronger than you and is going to beat you up and make you submit, but rather that's so strong and he's your guy that you're like, yeah, you know what? I'll follow him. It's like, I want to be as good as him. I'm not, but I'm willing to follow this guy because this guy's amazing. He's a good guy. He takes care of us. He's our leader. That's our guy. And then finally, the last abstraction, which Peterson says is an amazing abstraction because it's an extremely complex one, is, okay, can you abstract that one level further? Is there something that no matter how powerful you are, no matter if you were the strongest person in existence, you would and should still submit yourself to? Even if nothing else exists that could beat you, is there something that you should still submit yourself to rather than just following whatever it is that you want? And at that point, you start getting this abstracted ideal that doesn't even exist in reality. Like, you can think of it kind of like a simulacrum. There's no reference to it in reality, but it's a perfected ideal. And for Peterson, he says, and that's what we start to latch on to as God. And so then the last part is, well, why does both God and in the Christian, canon, Jesus, why do they seem to act like people? Like, why does God care about loyalty? He's literally created everything. And within this theory, it makes a lot more sense because it's this idea of, well, because our abstractions of that God mean that we needed a personification of a God. If we actually imagined a real God and followed the rules of that actual God, he wouldn't care about us. He wouldn't consider us. He wouldn't, we'd be nothing and no one to him. We'd be dust to that person. But that doesn't help us at all. It doesn't help us conceptualize how to act or what to do. And it doesn't help us solve that problem. So therefore, these abstractions and conceptualizations are a way to understand what our ideal is, and most importantly, what we should be aiming at and doing. Now, for Peterson, he's going to then go that's the purely secular summary of that. But that doesn't completely clear it. You can still go further if you're more religious leaning and make a bigger claim of that religion. So those are just some of the main points of the lecture that I kind of want to explain a little bit further and hopefully make a little bit clearer for everyone else. But thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Roger. All right. So folks, we're going to try something new. We are going to discuss these questions that Roger and Victor have put down in the breakout rooms. So I'm opening up the breakout rooms. The way I have set them up is that you can go ahead and choose to enter a breakout room. Okay. So don't enter them yet. I'm just going to start them. The first one is on the topic of why bother with Bible. Why study Bible? So if you want to discuss that, you can go to that room. The second one is about the topic of empiricism versus phenomenology, of what is the role of identifying objective things in the world, and what is the role of the experiential angle, how you experience things in your consciousness and how do they play together. That's the second room. The third room is going to be about facts and abstraction. What is real? Are facts real? Are abstractions real? Are both of them real? What is the relationship between them? Okay, that's 3. Fourth is the relationship between articulated knowledge and the implicit or unconscious or dreamlike knowledge, and how they play together. The fifth is the core idea of Jordan Peterson about God as an abstraction of hierarchy. And then there is a sixth room, which is an open room. So what we're going to do is we're going to run these breakout rooms for about 12 minutes each. Okay, so you can go into any room. After 12 minutes, we'll come back here and then you can choose another room. So you will have a chance of doing these discussions at least 4 times. Okay, so if you find that there are already 8 people in the room, don't go to that room, go to some other room. You'll have a chance to go to that room later on. All right, so go ahead, and the people with star in their name will be the facilitators to make sure that everything remains on topic. Remember, in the breakout rooms, there are 4 rules. Keep on topic, in which, in this case, it is focus on answering the question or the issue that is placed on the table in that room. Okay. Number two, be brief. There's all kinds of amazing people here. You want to hear what they have to say, not just hear yourself speak. Okay. Rule number three, speak your mind, be authentic, and do so courteously. Okay. And fourth, encourage others to speak. All right. And facilitators will help you with these rules. So, all right. So with that, go ahead and choose your rooms. If you have difficulty choosing the rooms, I will go ahead and move you. You can just tell me, you can just unmute and tell me which room you would like to go to, and I will put you in that room. Okay. All right. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. All right. So what we're going to do is let's do a lightning round now. I think you've had a chance to probably go to 2 rooms, maybe 3 rooms, something like that. But this is, I think this format is, we will need to do tweaking so that everybody doesn't end up in one. And what we'll make sure next time is that some moderators are there in all the rooms. So that way, so moderators in the future, I would recommend just watch the rooms. If it has no moderators, you can jump in there. Are you guys able to see who is there in the room? Okay.
Yes.
Very good. Very good.
Yes.
So let's do a lightning round, because this is the beginning of the series, and I really want to know what is on your mind. How are you approaching it? What are the big questions? Now, instead of giving a speech, you can talk about the big questions on your mind. You can put up to 2 questions down, and then we will do kind of a lightning round of answering them. So who would like to go first? So go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to put your questions down, because this is really special. We're going through the Bible, but we're taking it, the approach of Jordan Peterson is very interesting, because he's looking at the psychological meaning behind. So he's very much following Carl Jung's lead in this, of saying, what about the human psyche? What about the human experience results in these ideas being so crucial? So go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to talk about just the questions on your mind. Okay, so we'll list all the questions, and then we'll try to answer them as best as we can. Nari, what's your question?
So I watched a bit of Jordan Peterson's video, and I know he went on a bit on the dream thing. And because he said, when his wife and him, like he would, they have an argument and he is upset and she goes to bed and sleeping away, and next morning she would tell him about a dream, and he seemed to gravitate to that. And I personally, like, I dreamt a lot, yes, in my youth. And
Nari, could you go ahead and frame it as a question? Because we're not trying to answer questions. We're trying to
the
put the questions down. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, where he's going with this. Like, what is your opinion? Where is Jordan Peterson going with this series?
Oh, very good. Where is Jordan Peterson going with this series? Very good. Excellent question. All right. Next up is Larry. Larry, what's your question? You need to unmute yourself.
Someone else once said this, that we believe in the Bible because it's the best thing we have. So is it a process of elimination why we choose the Bible as an explanation of things that the temporal mind cannot understand?
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. So why do people choose Bible to explain experience? Very good. Choose Bible. Okay, next up is going to be Joe.
Yeah, I thought I had another minute to actually try and formulate my question. My question is just is around how do we extract practical value from this series specifically? I mean, we've always extracted practical value from the Bible one way or the other. That's what the whole point is. But this specific in today's context, not even this series, in today's context.
Wonderful, excellent. Series. Okay, why? How do we extract practical value? Let's put it from this series, because I would like to, there are many people here who have gone through this series multiple times, so they will be able to, put their thoughts down. Next up is Brian. Brian, what's your question?
Okay, my question is, does a personal truth need to be based on an empirical reality in order to be valid?
Wonderful. Does personal truth need to be based on empirical reality for it to be valid? Very good. Larry, you have one more question.
Yes. To what extent is religion also an ideology?
Wonderful. Is religion an ideology? When is it so, and when is it not?
Right.
Excellent. Next up is Maritza.
If tradition is the tool for shaping the thinking of young people, how do we look at the Bible from a perspective of keeping the good traditions, but while we acknowledge the not good traditions, how do we form that separation of those traditions that we just want to acknowledge versus those traditions that we want to acknowledge and continue?
Wonderful. Excellent question. I don't know how to phrase it well. Let me think. So what you're saying is that tradition is a tool for shaping the young, but you have to distinguish between, glorious traditions and not so glorious traditions.
Yeah, like it brought up in one of the rooms I was in, the concept of slavery. Now, we don't want to forget that slavery is a part of our history,
Yes.
but we don't want to shine any spotlights on it.
Right. So how do you continue the good and life-giving parts of the tradition while avoiding the life-destructive parts of the tradition? Okay, very good. Excellent. Anybody else wants to raise a question? Okay, so let's start with very broad questions. So let's see with the broad questions. So there are broad questions of where is Jordan Peterson going with this series? And how do we extract practical value from this series? Okay, so now this is a question for people who have watched the series, who are familiar with the series. So first I'm going to defer to people who have watched the series. If you have watched the series, go ahead and type exclamation mark about, and you can deal with it together.
The whole series, or just, I'm sorry, the whole series, or just?
No, whole series, because we're trying to see the whole series and what Jordan Peterson is trying to do with the series and how can we use it. There are many people here who have watched the series and thought about it and talked about it a lot. And please take your time, because this is a very important question. And those of us who are reading, who are watching the series for the first time would really appreciate, you creating some kind of a context of where it is going and what are the potential of this. So it's going to be Brian, Roger, Maritza, and Pegor. Brian.
In the groups the talking groups I was just in, more than one person said there's an interpretation is necessarily a part of personal interpretation is a part of understanding the Bible. I think where Jordan Peterson is heading with this is that he is trying to establish a framework, let's say a more contemporary framework for each of us to personally reconsider or to consider the Bible for the first time.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I really like, the personal interpretation on one hand, that's very big part of his thought. And second is that it is contemporary. It kind of is doing what Maritza is talking about, of kind of focusing on what he thinks is the psychological significance of things. He's not looking at, he's not looking at every aspect of it. He's looking at what he thinks is important, what he thinks is relevant today. So excellent points. Next up is going to be Roger. And Roger, please take your time on this one.
Sorry, can you give me the question again?
Yeah, the question is twofold. One is, where is Jordan Peterson going with this series? And second part is, how do we extract practical value from this series?
Yeah, so kind of similar.
Let me introduce. Look, Roger has been working at this for a long time. This is, I think he's done many meetups on this. And for many of these lectures, he has done multiple meetups. So he's kind of, he's marinated in this. So Roger, go ahead.
Yeah, honestly, I would say that Brian kind of already hit the main point that I would say, because I think that's kind of what makes those lecture series quite convincing, is that he provides a way of looking at the Bible that doesn't require you at all to believe in any magical thinking, to buy into any of the myths, to do any of the things that normally under contemporary society, most people, especially staunch atheists, would just not humor, and gives a path to see the Bible in a very different light, and to see value not just in the Bible but in the myths of our cultures and like the stories that we have around us that we've, or at least that I growing up never really took seriously, never saw any internal value to, thought that they were interesting stories that didn't have anything to do with me, that we're kind of cool but whatever. And I think in one of our groups we were talking about the fact that I've done a lot of these meetups and how often I've covered just the Cain and Abel story, which to me is immensely surprising, how such a very, very simple, very short story can actually give you a lot of insight into human psychology, our existential condition, your own mental health, how you can conceptualize and understand the world in like a really, really short story. You could just, if you just pay attention to what is implied within these stories, you can very quickly understand much more than what appears to be there. And I think he does that without requiring you to like make any giant leaps of faith. And I think that's what makes it so impressive.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Roger. I just want to say, we talked about the power of the mythos, power of the story, because it actually suggests things. It kind of, as opposed to logos, which is kind of states things explicitly, what a story does, and which is what, Jordan Peterson is focusing on, is that it actually creates concretized version encapsulating the story. But so many of the lessons are built into it. Like if you wanted to say, there are these 20 principles, you would have to write them out and you would have to get them kind of sequentially. What a story does is that it packs all of them into a character, into a single motion, a sequence of events, an interaction between people. And we as human beings can get that in a very powerful, visceral, emotional way that is difficult to get. I mean, it's not either or. Bible does both, the mythos and logos, but there is this tremendous power to mythos. The Greeks spent a lot of time with Homeric poetry and Homeric stories because they are so rich in meaning and they suggest so much. Thank you. Next up is going to be Maritza, followed by Pegor. Maritza.
So I would agree with you, Shrikant, that in his own way, where Peterson is trying to go with this series is he is attempting to identify something that he believes is vital and necessary to us as a people. And so that's where I think he's going with it. He's trying to create or use the Bible as or to show it to us as the glue for a variety of ideas, thoughts, and things that we hold without question as the natural order of things, as it were, or the natural chaotic mess of things. He's looking to identify to us that in some way or form, it stemmed from this, big tome of just a whole variety of stories. And he explains from where he believes they come explicitly, implicitly, and he does a really good job of of not emphasizing any one bias. And while it is and should be acknowledged that he himself considers himself a Christian, that's not the angle that he's presenting to us. And for myself personally, I find it to be even more admirable that he's not specifically targeting this audience of Christians, and he's purposefully seeking a broader audience. And I find that to be very admirable because it's hard to do in general, but it's the Bible. So that seems almost an impossible task. How do you tackle this, tale that is everything about it screams Christianity? How do you manage to tackle the stories within it without directly shining a spotlight on Christianity itself? And somehow that's what Peterson is embarking upon with his series. I think he succeeds personally. And you are aware of the fact that he's Christian, but that's not at all what he's pointing out to you. It's such a richer format that he's taking, and he's attempting, or what I most enjoyed about it is he points out how even in other tomes there are these threads, and they all can be found in different tales within the Bible. And it's fascinating. If you are into any type of literary aspect of other works, this is just one to add to it. And I think that that's sometimes lost in the religious overtones. So I like that here you're allowed to look at it as more than just a guidebook for the very religious of one particular sector. He's showing us that anyone from any walk of faith or from a lack of faith can find use and even use this book for their own self-improvement and the improvement of society in general. And it's fascinating to watch him weave that spin on the Bible. And I totally get why, when you're at the very beginning, you're like, where is he going? What are we doing here? But that's where he's going. And he's going to feed it to us in a easy to digest bites. Well, mostly.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Next up is going to be Pegor, followed by Joe. Pegor.
Yeah, so for me, at least on a personal level, as the title suggests, he sort of proves to me that the stories in the Bible aren't just fairy tales, as a lot of people sort of have this approach to it. And as to the practical, I don't want to I'm not going to give away any spoiler alerts, but later on when we get to Cain and Abel, the Tower of Babel, and Abraham, he pulls out the what you should do and what you shouldn't do kind of stuff. Like he pulls out the 12 rules from the from the stories, and so it's just a matter of like watching them. And as like everyone before me has mentioned, he pulls out the rules, and the rules are sort of uh, devoid of any sort of religious premises, so to speak. So like he goes like, okay, ignore God for a moment, the existence of God and that question. Here's what the story is telling you. Here's the rule inside the story.
Thank you. Thank you, Pegor. Next up is Joe, followed by Jade. Joe.
Yeah, just two really quick points. Is that I think he's looking at the psychological impact that the Bible has on ourselves, and I think the other part is the moral consequences of what happens when God disappears. And the thing that I find to be very interesting is who he incorporates into his philosophy. He talks about how, he admires Nietzsche, and despite being an atheist, and so that he's taking this very objective approach and saying, what happens again if this, if you tear down this order, what's behind it? And there's tyranny behind it, and things along those lines. And then the personal psychological aspect of it is the Freud and the Jungian approach. So I mean, that's kind of where I saw the practical and the more the more actionable things coming from. Just in the beginning anyway. I've only watched the first video, but I think it's also a warning of you tear down order, be careful what's behind it.
Thank you, Joe. Jade.
I suspect,
go ahead.
Jordan Peterson is doing a lot of things with this. One of the things, sorry, my phone is acting funny. One of the things I suspect that he is doing is he's actively trying to figure out the text, and he says that even while he's explaining it. So I think on some level, even though he's very definitive with his statements, he also questions them. So he's also, I think it's appealing to people and accessible because he's not necessarily making himself the authority on the Bible. He's giving an interpretation of the Bible, which I think a lot of people find more accessible. Because when I talk to most of the people that I talk to about religion who don't embrace religion or Christianity, a lot of the answers that I get are within the hierarchy within the religious system and the authorities who dictate what they're supposed to hear and how they're supposed to interpret the Bible and things like that. And I think, again, Jordan Peterson is putting forth something somewhat specific with what he's doing, but I also kind of get the sense that, like other people are saying, it's more accessible, but I sense that the psychology of what he's doing is he's making it accessible by not making himself the authority on it. And he's inviting people into his personal investigation of the Bible, because I feel like with Jordan Peterson, a lot of the time, that's what we're doing. He's inviting us into his thought process about things as he's figuring it out. And I think people enjoy being part of the process because you hear his thoughts evolve as he's explaining it. Sometimes it's not even a straight line. He'll question the statement or the assertion that he's made within his own conversation. So you're actually thinking it through with him. So that's all assumption, but that's what I'm seeing also.
Wonderful. So let's take the next question. I think the logical question that comes after this is Maritza's question, is that how do you keep all the good things about the tradition and avoid the bad things about the tradition? And I think Brian did a very good job. He was very brief, but he did a very good job of capturing the sense. So he talked about two things. One is that it is personal interpretation of the work. And second is that it is contemporary. So you are kind of, and I think that's what he's actually doing, what Maritza is talking about. He's saying, let's look at this. Let's look at this as modern people. So he's not leaving aside science and everything that he knows. He's carrying that with him. At the same time, he's saying he's not kind of taking everything as given. He's just looking for psychological meanings, kind of deep things that still resonate with us. So it is a very much of a personal interpretation. So the question that Marisa has raised is, how do you do that? How do we study the Bible? And certainly that's what we are doing here when we are studying Tao Te Ching, or when we are studying the Bible, or we're studying any ideas. We're trying to say, what does this mean to me? We are looking at kind of personal interpretations of it. We're trying to engage the ideas as best as we can. We are not taking ideas as given, but we are actually engaging them ourselves. That's one thing. Second is that we are trying to do it synoptically, in the sense that we are trying to bring to bear all our contemporary knowledge on every idea that we are looking at. So this is exactly what we do in these meetups. So any thoughts about that? When we're studying a tradition, how do we make sure that we take the best of it and keep the best of it and actually live by the best of it? At the same time, not take in things that kind of undercut us. So it's going to be Joe, Rami, and Pegor. Joe.
I think the most important part is to not be dogmatic about it. That's the critical part. Once you're not dogmatic about it, then you're able to interpret it. So that's the first step. The second part is he talked about in the video, and I think it captures it, is the idea of it being institutionalized and how power is associated with the Bible itself. So that's kind of how you, I mean, for us, that's not a problem. But if you're talking on a societal level, the idea of institutions and power being associated with the Bible is a very dangerous thing. Mm-hmm. So that's where I think that's how you extract value and wisdom from it without actually it being weaponized. And I think also something that has also come out in our during one of our discussions was the combination of how it enables order, but it ignores the feminine too much, maybe. So that how can we incorporate things like the Tao Te Ching? Mm-hmm. And I think Jordan Peterson does that into this, and you have order and chaos, but then you also understand how to basically extract value from those. But I think the lack of institutional, lack of dogma is critical to both of those efforts. Excellent.
That's a great point. And that reminds me that there is another question which is actually closely related to this question, is that when does religion become an ideology? And when is it that it doesn't become an ideology? When does it become a dogma? When does it, kind of is taken as a whole, and the way you take it, it actually stops you from making observations about things, versus when is it that it is not an ideology? So again, it's the same. I think it's a way of approaching the same issue of how do you get the best without losing to the worst. Next up is going to be Rami, Pegor, and Jade. Rami.
Thank you. To connect to some of what Joseph was saying and what you're bringing up, and I think Brian was bringing up, there's a question that most especially Dee in our last group 3 had she had asked the question, how do you come to terms with people who will take what they would consider a literal reading of the Bible and then weaponize that, or use it to justify themselves? and how do you know that what the way that they're using any particular piece of scripture actually reflects the intent of that scripture? And I think that the answer to that question is, well, you have to compare it and read it in the context of the overarching themes of the total anthology. For instance, one of the themes is the question, what does it mean I desire mercy, not sacrifice? There are groups, speak contemporarily, there have been groups within the 20th century, for instance, who have done things like institute, they would take the Bible, for instance, and attach it to themselves so as to try to legitimize their own. And I'm thinking of the sign that says the Church of Jesus Christ and the Ku Klux Klan, for instance, where they're using it to kind of make themselves somehow justified in their positions. But another theme in the Bible is freedom, I think, and removal from violence. Ephesians 6:12, where we're not battling flesh and blood here, and very much that was a case. So I just wanted to toss out there that we can't read the Bible literally because it is too serious a work to take it that lightly. We have to go into the depths of it, and as we travel throughout life and gather experiences, more of it makes sense, so that at one age we may understand it at one level. With more life experience, we may have a deeper understanding and appreciation and get something even new out of something we had read before.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you, Rami. I mean, one of the things that I find really interesting is to look at how Bible was studied over time. And what I'm saying doesn't really apply only to Bible, but to any kind of reading. Like, for example, there is this idea of exegesis. And that is kind of, it's based on the idea of the four forms of Aristotle. So there is literal, there is the actual words, but there is also the, that's the logos, but there is also the mythos. You're trying to it's not just literal, but there are stories that are being captured that is kind of trying to give you as an allegory of what does this look like in real life. That's another angle on it. The third angle on it is the final cause, where you think, okay, where is this going? What is the meaning of it? What is the conclusion of it? So there is the final cause. So you have those three things, and the last. So there is final cause. There is formal cause, which is the literal. There is the I'm sorry, I'm blanking out here. There is the material cause, and what is the last one? What is the fourth cause of Aristotle?
Is that ethos?
No, but what is the fourth cause? Give me a efficient cause. Okay, which is basically the moral cause. So you're trying to come up with a moral. So you're saying, what is the moral of this? What does it look like in real life? What does it actually say? And where will you end up if you pursued this? And when you look at the way in which Bible was studied during, say, time of Aquinas, is that they would do this, and they would do this so it's not just a book. There is the conversation, the layer of conversation on the top of it. It's kind of like what we're doing with Tao Te Ching, where we are doing these kind of cycles of different people focused on the same text, trying to get meaning out of it. And the other point is that of the historical context. The more you understand the context of it. So for example, Lao Tzu, you have to understand who he is, when he is writing, and what is the context. And then you can kind of say, what are the limits of it? What are the strengths of it? What are the focuses of it? You understand that better. You can't take a word from that and just take today's context, because then you would be looking at something which is radically different from what was meant. Thank you. Next up is going to be Pegor followed by Jade. Pegor.
Yeah, so regarding the sort of the taking the good and like keeping the bad, I don't really have an answer, but I have like a caution in the sense that specifically when it comes to religious texts, when we say that there's an implied sort of stance that we're taking that we are somehow better than the divine authority that gave forth this text, and so somehow we know better than God in deciding what's the good and what's the bad. So that's the cautionary message. And regarding like when religion goes into ideology or becomes ideological or whatever, a good approach is, I think, to look at the word heresy. In its Greek form, it means choice, in the sense that when you choose to focus on a specific part of the religious text at the expense of everything else. And I think when people start doing that, when they start taking a specific verse or a specific chapter or whatever from the Bible or any other religious text, and they focus on that and they say, this is the whole thing, that's when things become heretical and i.e. subsequently ideological in some sense. And that goes off the path, because the idea is you need to take all the texts.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Pegor. Next up is going to be Jade, followed by Alvaro. Jade.
Gregor basically said what I was gonna say, actually, both kind of points, because I was touching on how people like to play with the Bible and pick and choose what to believe and what not to believe. But what I will add is that I think one of the things that makes it difficult is, and I think this is also speaking to some other things that Gregor kind of said, the second point is that with the Bible, I don't think it's necessarily about becoming the authority or not over what the deity or God has determined is the meaning of the text. I think it's us. I think it ends up being man fighting against man about what is valid and what needs to be really considered or worthwhile, or how it's interpreted and how it's put into action. And I also find that there are a lot of, well, let me not say a lot of people, there are people who kind of keep a lot of it as platitudes, where they don't want to find a definitive message within the word at all. There's no balance between, and the ironic part of that is those are also people who read it more as a text and a historical tome. And I think that's interesting, because they're not coming from leaving it as an abstract faith-based concept. It's more like, I don't know what this says because nobody has told me what this means. So I think on some level, we kind of have to find that balance between the authority of whoever we believe gave us this text and our authority to interpret the text, and our authority to interpret it for ourselves with our own mind's eye, with our own discretion and understanding. Because again, it brings me back to why a lot of people don't like the church, is because of authority figures telling them how to read it and how to act because of it. And I think when you kind of bring your own sense of agency and self-determination into there, like you leverage the free will you're reading about in the Bible, I think it helps a little bit, because you're not, kind of as Joe was saying, you're not going to be as dogmatic about it. You're not just going to say authority told me that this is what I'm supposed to do, so I'm going to beat these people because this is a religious war. You're gonna think about it, and you're going to use your own discretion. And again, I think one of the best things that Pregor said, which I was trying not to repeat, was to read the whole text, because you'll find that, you know, even, I don't remember what it is, but there's a time for war, there's a time for peace, there's a time to cry, there's a time to laugh. I'm quoting it completely wrong, but it's like there are portions of the Bible where it kind of tells you like there's a balanced approach to things. And if you read I still haven't read it cover to cover. I'm trying, but I don't know if I ever will. But it's just that concept of, you know, yeah, there's certain things that you don't know and there's things that you know, and to be okay with that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jade. Next up is Alvaro. Alvaro, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to mention that there has been quite a few comments that I really have enjoyed, and they have articulated things that have been in my mind for a long time. And I thought I was alone thinking about them in that way. Among them, the comment by Joe speaking about power, and also that specific comment that was mentioned about God seeking mercy and not sacrifice, and looking at the Bible as a whole. I thought that was really capturing the spirit of what we should do. But what I want to point out is that many of these issues that we're bringing up, we think are man-made, meaning they're made by us people trying to institutionalize religion after the Bible was created. The thing is that these type of issues are in the Bible itself. So when we study the New Testament, we will see that Paul is actually maybe having some dissent with Peter with things like circumcision and many other things that pertain to the church. So my question is, if that appears in the Bible itself, can we really have hope? Can we really aspire to conduct ourselves in a manner in which we don't have those issues among us, if in the Bible itself we find them, and we find them by the very same people who put the foundations for us?
Thank you, Alvaro. Next up is going to be Rami, followed by Jade. Rami.
Well, a lot of people, it was popular for a number of centuries, even if you didn't believe in God, to have some Bible in your background, because it gave you a set of cultural stories that everyone could relate to. And there are psychological, there are internal processing, there are sociological, there are communitarian advices in there that allow there to be a general sense of direction for how to get along with one another and not tear each other apart. And there are tons and tons and tons of stories of where people just got it wrong. And what we can draw from that is, don't do that, and this is why. And that's just a wonderful resource. You asked, is there hope? I'm just going to repeat what Jesus said in the Gospels. He would say, by man alone, no, but with God, all things are possible. So there's your hope.
Thank you, Rami. Next up is going to be Brian, Larry, and Jade. Brian.
I would say two things. First of all, just as regards this group and the way the group is conducted for the newcomers, how do we capture the good and leave behind the bad? That's an individual personal exercise. And we do it as a group by mutually respecting what we bring in and into the discussion, and mutually respecting what each of us takes out of the discussion. So that's as regards this group. And I think more broadly, and I think that hopefully you'll all find that very encouraging and reassuring. As regards the bigger questions, can there be division, or can we heal divisions in the light of disagreements like the ones between Peter and Paul? Again, I think the answer is yes, and it's through mutual respect. I don't think agreement should be the goal. Agreement can occur, and there can be good things that come out of agreement. But mutual respect will heal the divisions.
Thank you, Brian. Next up is Larry, followed by Jade. Larry. Larry, you need to unmute yourself.
I didn't realize I had to use an exclamation. I was raising my hand and realized I could use exclamation. Wow. I want to go back to one of the first things Roger said, is that it doesn't take a leap of faith. And I'm saying, well, just to accept the concept of God is a leap of faith. This whole talk of it's almost like, how can you use in the same sentence the Bible and secular in the same sentence? I always felt they contradicted one another. Also, they say in the beginning, the word was written. Now, do we have a sense of revisionism that somehow all that was knowledge was not manifested in the Word of God. That, you know, as time, it's almost like the sense of the Bible being temporal to the extent that God, and, you know, envisioned, it's almost like envision the future, you know, that the God was not temporal of its time, then why would it constantly be amended? And just the whole subjective idea of interpreting the Bible to, you know, contemporary times, it really disturbs me. One reason I've never really got into the Bible, it's almost like I even feel that, you know, Jordan Peterson's going to suck me in slowly. He's going to say, okay, Larry, you know, this is, you know, anyone could do this. You know, you could have, you know, you could do whatever you want. And, but eventually, you know, I'm saying, oh, this sounds good. Oh, that sounds good. And then eventually he got me. And I say, then he'll say, but you have to believe in God. And it's almost like he doesn't want me. It's like he doesn't want to say the inevitable. Because I think he even said during one of his lectures that you can't do the Bible without God. And, you know, everyone's saying, oh, we could interpret it any way we want. And I'm saying that's not true. I think that, you know, it's like if you want to give, you know, your child a bowl of cereal, you put some honey in it. But eventually you have to eat the cereal without honey or else you become a diabetic. It's a bad metaphor, but it's what I'm trying to say. I'm a student of psychology, but, you know, he's using the language of the psychologist to lead me into a religious point of view. And it's like I constantly feel I have to be on guard. I have to be on guard because all this, you know, contemporary, this whole thing that everything has become so contemporary, I don't think is going to hold the more deep I get into the Bible.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry. Next up is going to be Jade, followed by Rami. Jade.
I just have quickly to add that the Bible also kind of tries to help with that. Again, I'm still working to read it cover to cover, so I might not understand the concept of the false prophets and apostles in the type of depth that I need to. But the Bible warns of false prophets and apostles, people who will tell you, who will claim that this is something that things are supposed to be done in a particular way, but this is not the right way. And they will claim that this is the right way under biblical law or whatever other laws, but this is not the right way. So you need to learn how to discern between false prophets and true prophets. So I think, again, it kind of brings back to the discernment, having a holistic view of everything and being able to kind of on some level make yourself an authority on deciding who's the authority that you're going to follow. I don't know if that added anything worthwhile, but like, because it's not a fully fleshed out point, but yeah, it's something.
Thank you. Thank you, Jade. Next up is Rami.
Excellent. Thank you, Jade. Larry, I would say maintain your position because faith is not a matter of the will. Just be present and let the story take you, let your exploration through the stories take you where they will. And then if you're going to believe, it's because God places that belief in you. You don't have to like force it or make it happen or say, okay, I do it now. It's just going to wind up overwhelming you one day. And then you'll have this transformation. That's part of the power of the work.
Thank you, Rami. Next up is Roger.
I also just wanted to respond to Larry and put him at ease to some extent. Partly because it might help to still understand that for me, I'm still agnostic. I've always been quite agnostic. I think it's more the philosophical training of like, even if I would completely know, I'm like, I don't actually know now. But
Roger, could you move the mic closer to your mouth a little bit? Yeah.
Oh, let me make sure I have the right mic. Oh, that's fine. Give me a sec.
There you go. Is that better?
Much better.
Okay. Sorry about that. But no, the point that I wanted to just make to Larry was that what I meant by secular and by not making leaps of faith is that what Peterson is also doing here is making the case for a much more Jungian approach, that humans have an instinct for religion, and that conceptualization of reality with religion, that's how we're evolved to process the world, and that starts to make sense why you constantly see humans either create religions or, in lack of religions, depend on ideologies to fill that gap. And then once you start seeing that perspective, then you start to see what the purpose of the religion is attempting to articulate, what its goal is. And even without believing the religion itself, you can see where the psychological necessity for an abstracted ideal starts to come in, and that you see it in multiple different instances, that the humans are constantly trying to get to that point. And you can say, oh, well, when I say God, if I say God is an abstracted conception from an evolutionary process, is God real? It's like, well, that's why Peterson always says, when he's asked if he believes in God, he's like, well, it depends what you mean by God, because that conception is not at all what most religious people have. But that conception you can still make the case for. I don't think Peterson stops at that. He says you can make the case for that, but then there's more. And I think Jung was kind of similar, where he's like, look, here's what we got here. There's another wall. I'm not going to cross that, but you do you there on that end. But you can stop at that point. And even at that point, there's plenty to gain, there's plenty to understand, and there's plenty to learn about, oh, well, even if I don't want to be religious, I don't want to conceptualize the world in that way, I now understand why people do. It's not just something that I'm just like, oh, you guys don't know anything about anything, and of course you believe that because it's just convenient for you. It's like, no, it's like there's actually a lot of good reasons to believe this, and a lot of good justified reasons to have that perspective. And I think that's more the appeal that I was trying to get to. So I promise you, it's not so much trickery as two different definitions of where you could land.
Thank you, Roger. Thanks. Next up is Marisa.
I just wanted to kind of piggyback a little bit on what Roger was saying, and point out that a slightly more archaic definition of the word ideology is it was considered the science of ideas, the study of their origin and nature. So if you look at it from that perspective, what you're doing here is you're looking at we are studying the origin and nature of this idea of a religion or religions, of a god or gods. Well, only gods in the Trinity here for this this book. But so I don't think that it's necessarily, you won't be led into a stream where you're forced to drink of religion, but you will be kind of led down the path where it's an easy option should you choose to do so. But it's like Roger said, it's at the very least, you will now not look at those who do drink from those waters as absolute aliens. You might have a little bit better understanding for why people behave in a matter. I really like the statement that everyone needs a philosophy. And that's kind of the way I view, and as I try to walk gently through this world, that's what I remind myself when I see people doing all kinds of weird stuff, is that we all have to believe in something, and that's fine and that's great. But the counterbalance of that is that none of us believe in anything blindly. And the appealing thing about Peterson in this series is that in his own way, he's saying the same thing, but he's doing it in a way cooler fashion, because what he's doing is he's dissecting this book that is the guiding light for so many who walk this earth. And it's so pervasive in so much of our ancestry that you almost can't get away from it, no matter how how much you may reject the religion itself in your personal day-to-day, there is still a portion of you, of your ancestors, that walked with some part of this. So why not now in today's world, walk with Peterson and learn about your ancestors? And then you can decide how much of that you will incorporate into your future, and how you're going to share that with the people around you.
Thank you, Maritza. So I want to build on what Roger and Maritza have been saying and apply it to this group. Okay, so it's actually a very interesting group. Some of us are religious and some of us are not. Some people are very deeply religious, and many of us are not. And the thing that is unusual about this group is that we are actually talking to each other in a respectful way, where we are trying to understand where the other person is coming from. We're also looking at it at a historical level, because you're not just, you're trying to understand how did we come here from, from the base of history, and you can't really not know about ideas that have shaped a large part of history. And so part of it is historical. We also are, this is a very unusual format where people can speak, from their heart very openly to people who completely disagree, completely are coming from a completely different point of view. And the other people will actually hear you, and they will do the same. They will speak from wherever they are. Okay, and that is, that's the kind of modus operandi where kind of truth and kind of exploration of truth matters more than what you currently hold. And people are, and these are very deep topics. And you can say, I agree with this part, but not that part. I can see where this is coming from, but I have no idea where that comes from. And I completely disagree with this. But as a result of the conversation, you form a very nuanced view. You kind of learn what you actually think better, because you're hearing all these multiple points of view. So that is the advantage of exploring a topic like this together. We're doing the same thing for Tao Te Ching. There are some people there who grew up with it, and many of us are just new to it. And then the other thing that we are doing is that we are comparing ideas across. So we're saying, okay, what is it that Tao is saying, and what is it that Bible is saying, and what is it that Aristotle is saying, and what is the view of science, and what are the relationships between them? And we're trying our best to understand each of these ideas in their own terms. Can't forget that Lao Tzu is writing in 500 BC in China. And, the founding fathers are in America. And then, so you kind of have to look at those times. It's a enormously hard thing to do on one hand, but enormously easy thing to do on other hand, because you're simply trying to understand, and you're simply trying to understand the ideas as best as you can, and doing it in your own way and hearing each other. So that's what, okay, Larry, go ahead. You need to unmute yourself again.
Thank you. I listen to a lot of his lectures. I like him, but there's people who he associates with, when they talk, they're very...
Let's not talk about Jordan Peterson. Let's just talk about this particular...
Okay.
We want to keep it on focus here.
Okay.
Okay. Because we are also running a little late.
Okay.
But because I don't want to start a new topic. But this is, this is the approach that we are using to study this. And Roger, I think this was a great start to the series. And Victor, as always, that was a fantastic way of. I always love your PowerPoints, and we will do the same. The breakout rooms kind of worked, kind of did not work. Some things worked, some things did not work. Any thoughts about breakout rooms? Anybody? I think the idea of questions is very powerful. I think ability to move between the breakout rooms is very powerful. We need to do something about too many people being in the room. That's the only kind of thing that I can think of. Are there any other big suggestions on breakout rooms? Any observations? Anybody?
Maybe.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Without having pushed the exclamation, I think that I agree totally with what you said, and I have nothing to add.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Victor, you were saying something, and then Avanik.
Yeah, I think if you can post the questions in the chat, so that will give a good reference what room to go in.
Wonderful. Pegor, you're our resident scribe. So I'll assign that to you. Next time we'll put the questions in chat also. Evanik, what do you think?
I think it's a good idea. I think the one thing is that I don't know if it's just maybe it needs to be explained, but when we went into the breakout rooms, I wound up in the one I was in before, and I thought I did something wrong, and I was like, I have no idea where I'm at.
My mistake. I need to redo the breakout rooms and retype everything again. Otherwise, we'll end up in the same breakout room. So I'll fix that next time.
Okay, perfect.
And it allows for really. I think breakout rooms are, the most useful part of this meetup, because that's where you can interface at a very deep level. It's a very good dance between kind of having a presentation where you have kind of a core ideas to focus on, so that it focuses everybody's mind, and then you do a lot of discussion, and then you come back and talk about our takeaways or questions, stuff like that. I think that format works very well. But I want to kind of keep experimenting. We did this coming Wednesday, we are going to do, bring your questions to breakout room galore. So we will be constantly creating new questions and new breakout rooms where people can go in and discuss them. So, and we will build this into this, in the Jordan Peterson series as well. So thank you very much, everybody. And we will see you soon. Bye.